He thought he could control the courtroom. With a nod, he smiled at jurors like they owed him something, passed notes to his lawyers like no one was watching. But someone was. And when one juror disappeared, and another came forward with a chilling secret, everything unraveled. This isn't just a celebrity trial. It's a high-stakes psychological game power silence and one man fighting to rig the system from inside the box. You're about to hear what the cameras couldn't show, what the transcripts tried to bury, and why this trial might become the biggest reckoning in Hollywood history. Let's begin. They say the courtroom is a temple of justice, but that morning it felt more like a theater, and we 12 strangers in a polished wood box were its uneasy cast. The light above us was harsh fluorescent, too bright for truth to hide. I remember the hush when he walked in. Not the judge, not the prosecutor. Him, Diddy. He didn't shuffle. He didn't stumble. He strolled in like the trial wasn't real, like we were the ones on display. He smiled, slow and subtle, and for the briefest moment our eyes met. I shouldn't have looked. But I did, and something in me flinched. Not because of fame. I'd seen celebrities before, but there was something reptilian behind that charm. A stillness, a calculation, as if he'd already rehearsed every expression. And I foolishly had walked into the performance blind. The bailiff called for silence. The judge entered. Papers shuffled. Voices cleared. But my mind stayed stuck on that glance. And I wasn't the only one. Juror #6, 2 seats to my left, leaned forward just enough to obstruct my view of the bench, then tilted his chin, nodding, a single subtle nod. It was the kind of gesture you make when you greet someone at a bar, not when you're supposed to be impartial in a federal trial. I thought maybe I imagined it. Maybe it was an itch, a tick, a nervous reflex. But then it happened again, not right away, not boldly, just deliberately. A glance from Diddy, a twitch of acknowledgement from Juror #6. My skin prickled. I told myself I was being paranoid, that in a room this heavy with tension, everything feels heavier than it is. But my gut had already started whispering. Something's wrong. The judge's voice was sharp today, sharper than usual. He wasn't entertaining delays or showmanship. He mentioned motions filed late last night, objections denied. Then he said it. Before we begin, we must address an issue with Juror #6. My stomach dropped. The room stilled. Even Diddy turned his head slowly. No one blinked. No one moved. Juror #6 didn't flinch, didn't speak. But I swear I saw him glance toward the defense table like he was waiting for a signal. Then the judge began reading, methodical, emotionless. There had been inconsistencies, conflicting answers. On record, Juror #6 had given different responses to a simple question. Where do you live and with whom? 3 answers, none matching. The judge called it a lack of candor. I called it something else. Deception. And yet what unsettled me more than the contradiction was the silence that followed it. Juror #6 didn't defend himself. He didn't even look confused. He just sat back as if this had been expected, as if he'd already known it was coming. The defense objected. Of course they did. They called it a misunderstanding. They said grilling him further would have a chilling effect on the rest of us. That phrase made me want to laugh. A chilling effect, as if we hadn't already been chilled by what we saw, what we suspected. I looked around the room. Eyes darted, hands fidgeted. The judge leaned forward. His tone softened, not because he was uncertain, but because he was about to land a final blow. I've thought carefully about this decision, he said. This jury must operate with the utmost transparency. The inconsistencies combined with Juror #6's demeanor are disqualifying. And just like that, he was gone. They escorted him out with little fanfare. No drama, just a rustle of movement and a slammed door behind him. But in my mind, the sound echoed. Loud, final. What struck me wasn't the dismissal itself, it was the ripple it caused inside the rest of us. That unspoken panic. If he could go, who's next? I sat up straighter, suddenly aware of my posture, my breathing, my thoughts. This wasn't just about evidence or cross-examinations anymore. It was about shadows, subtle looks, the weight of silence, the invisible strings that might be pulling things behind closed doors, because justice is supposed to be blind. But I couldn't help wondering, was it also deaf-numb or worse? Afraid. And if it was, what did that make me, one of the 12 witness pawn? I didn't know yet. But I knew one thing. Whatever this trial truly was, I had just stepped into its most dangerous scene. After Juror #6 was dismissed, something in the air shifted. The room didn't move. Not really. No one spoke out of turn. No one cried foul. But I could feel it like a tremor beneath the floorboards. The kind of shift only people forced to sit in silence can detect. You learn to read the room differently when you're not allowed to speak. And in that silence, I began watching everything. The way Diddy's jaw tensed when the alternate juror took that empty seat. The way his lawyer, Mark Agnifilo, scribbled something on a yellow notepad with a force that made the pen look like it would snap. The way Juror #8, a woman with sharp glasses and a tighter spine than a ballerina, sat unmoving, staring straight ahead, as if looking anywhere else might make her disappear. But it was the way Diddy looked at the new juror that bothered me most. Measured, hungry, like a man sizing up a chessboard after losing a rook. You don't expect to feel unsafe sitting in a federal courtroom with guards and law clerks and a judge whose every word is recorded and weighed. But I did. Not because someone might lunge across the room, but because someone might be working the room. There's a difference. It started making sense why the prosecution suddenly looked sharper, why they were moving quicker now, less meandering, more surgical. There was no time to waste. They were afraid the process itself might fracture. They'd seen it too, the subtle performance, the nods. And then there was the FaceTime call. The words came like glass falling to the floor. The prosecution asked to introduce a FaceTime conversation between Rob Holiday and the woman known only as Bana. A call where allegedly Diddy tried to settle a claim he swore never happened. If the incident didn't happen, why settle? If she was lying, why would he reach out? Defense fought hard. Hearsay, they barked. Irrelevant. But their panic told another story. And I couldn't ignore the fire that lit behind the prosecutor's eyes when they countered. You called her a liar, they said. So now we show she told the truth. That sentence stayed with me. You called her a liar. So now we show she told the truth. That was the moment the trial changed for me, not just in facts, but in weight. Suddenly, it wasn't about who had better lawyers or who crafted more clever arguments. It was about something ancient and raw. Truth, crawling its way through the cracks. I glanced at the new juror, the alternate who had quietly taken Juror #6's place. He was older, black, wore a gray blazer and a guarded expression. But what struck me most wasn't his silence. It was the way he kept glancing at the floor, not at Diddy, like he already knew better. We took a recess. I didn't want to stand, but I did. And that's when I saw her, another juror. I didn't catch the number, maybe #7. She was speaking to the bailiff. Her lips tight, her voice quiet but firm. Her hands didn't shake. She was reporting something. By the time we filed back in, the judge's face had changed again, no longer sharpened by irritation, but carved by concern. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, we will address an additional juror matter in due course. For now, let us proceed. Another juror. Already, this wasn't normal. The walls were bleeding tension now. Every movement became significant. Every glance, a potential thread to pull. And Diddy? Sat back in his chair, a hand to his chin, watching us like we were already answering questions he hadn't asked yet. He was no longer smiling. Good. Because I wasn't either. I was beginning to wonder if I could trust anyone in that room, including myself. And that terrified me most. By day 3, paranoia had a seat at the table. Not officially, of course, not with a nameplate or a badge, but it was there in the way we breathed in, the way our eyes darted sideways before settling on a witness. It crept between verdict forms, and notepads slipped under the door like a draft. No one said it aloud, but we all felt it. We were being watched. And not just by the cameras we knew were forbidden. No. It was deeper than surveillance. This was performance pressure, the kind that doesn't need microphones to be heard. It presses in when you're alone, when your thoughts start circling like vultures. I couldn't stop thinking about that juror, number 7 maybe, who had whispered to the court. Something they saw, something they felt. I didn't know what it was, but I knew it changed everything. The judge called a recess. Again, we weren't told why. No one ever tells the jurors why. But the bailiffs whispered to the clerk the sudden huddle of defense lawyers, the tension that stiffened Diddy's shoulders that told me enough. Another crack in the system. And then we were dismissed to the jury room. The robing room was quiet when I passed it in the hallway, but I could hear voices behind the thick wood door. Calm but tight. Phrases like zero tolerance and candor expectations leaked through. And I knew. They were talking about us. Inside the jury room, the others looked exhausted. The chairs creaked beneath us, the fluorescent lights humming overhead. I kept my thoughts to myself, but I could feel something had shifted even further since the last recess. Trust was thinning. I sat near the corner watching Juror #9 fidget with her necklace. Juror #3 scribbled meaningless loops into the margins of his legal pad. The man who'd replaced Juror #6, let's call him the newcomer, was staring at the wall like it might suddenly offer him a map out. And then, Juror #7 broke the silence. I saw him pass something she said softly, before recess. Head snapped toward her. Saw who I asked, though I already knew. She didn't say it, not right away. Just nodded toward the defense table, toward Diddy. A note. Slipped to his lawyer, she whispered. And I saw. I think. He mouthed something. To someone. My stomach flipped. She looked down. I don't know if it was meant for the jury, but it felt like it was. No one spoke after that. Because what do you say when you're supposed to be blind, and someone might be trying to make you see? Back in the courtroom, Judge Aaron finally addressed the room. In the interest of transparency, he said I have received concerns from within the jury panel. My spine straightened. There is a zero-tolerance policy in this court for attempts at communication with jurors, either direct or implied. Any such behavior will be met with swift consequences. He didn't name names, but his eyes were sharp, and they didn't leave the defense table for a long, long time. Diddy leaned back in his seat, calm, unreadable, but his lawyers were now a different story. Agnifilo was pale. Westmoreland clenched his jaw so hard, I thought I heard his teeth crack. A storm had started, and it wasn't coming from the prosecution. It was coming from within. And here's what scared me. If 2 jurors had already been compromised, how many of us were next? The judge reminded us again of our duty. Your oath is your compass, he said. No signal, no smile, no suspicion should sway you. Easy for him to say. He didn't sit 3 rows from a man who looked like he could shatter you with a glance. He didn't watch the jury box splinter from the inside out. He didn't wonder, every time the door opened, if he was next. I did. We all did. And for the first time, I wasn't sure we could hold. We returned from recess to find the courtroom colder, not in temperature, but in spirit, as if the air itself had learned to hold its breath. As if the wood-paneled walls, the polished floor, the flags, they all sensed something sacred had cracked. The judge's chair loomed taller that afternoon, his voice less measured, more metallic. Even the clerks, usually brisk, efficient, seemed unsure where to look. It wasn't just a trial anymore. It was an unraveling. Juror #6 was gone. His seat filled, his name never spoken again. But his absence echoed like a dropped gavel. And now, all eyes were on Juror #7. She sat straight, composed. But I saw the tremor in her fingers as she clutched her pen the same way a child clings to a nightlight. She had done the right thing, reported what she saw, but in doing so, she had reminded us all how fragile truth is in a room full of power. Across the aisle, Diddy didn't move, but I could feel his eyes searching, measuring, calculating. We weren't witnesses anymore. We were variables. And then the prosecution called their next move. Your Honor, they said, we request to enter into evidence a FaceTime call involving Mr. Rob Holliday. It felt like a door creaked open in a long-forgotten hallway. The defense protested, loud-layered, indignant. Hearsay, irrelevant, prejudicial, but their panic betrayed them. This wasn't just another objection. This was fear. I watched as one of Diddy's lawyers leaned over and whispered something urgent into his ear. His expression didn't change, but his hands, once casually folded, tightened. His thumb pressed so hard against his knuckle the skin turned white. And then the prosecution laid it bare. This call allegedly was made to the witness known as Bana, before any suit, before any public accusation. The call implies settlement. The call implies guilt. No one moved. No one breathed. Because if true, it meant the man who swore the incident never happened had tried to buy silence before it ever echoed. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about Diddy's past. It was about patterns. Whispers behind closed doors. Offers made off the record. Silence paid for in advance. The judge turned to us, the jury, and he spoke slowly, deliberately. You will not consider this evidence unless I rule it admissible. But you are to remember, truth often arrives clothed in contradiction. I couldn't help it. I looked toward Diddy again. He wasn't looking back anymore. He was staring down, jaw tight, the lines around his mouth drawn deeper than before. And I realized something then. The show was cracking. Not in the way scandals usually fall apart with headlines or protests or grainy footage leaked to the press. This was quieter, more terrifying, because it was falling apart from within, from inside the very room built to protect him. Behind me, a juror cleared his throat. The sound startled me more than it should have. I was raw. We all were. And in that moment, I understood what the judge had meant about candor. It wasn't just honesty. It was light, and someone, maybe more than one, had been trying to dim it. So I sat straighter, breathed deeper, took notes even when my hands didn't want to write. Because whatever this trial truly was, I was no longer just watching it. I was surviving it. It was supposed to be a trial, a ceremony of truth, cold, procedural, exacting. But by the 5th day, it felt more like a siege. The courtroom was no longer just a place. It was a pressure cooker. Every cough was a signal. Every pen, scratch a suspicion. And every one of us in the jury box was a fuse. I didn't sleep the night before. None of us did, I think. There's a fatigue that doesn't come from lack of rest. It comes from knowing you're being hunted in plain sight. The prosecution had built their foundation brick by brick. Testimony, timelines, transcripts, but what came next cracked the floor. Brendan Paul, Diddy's former assistant. Quiet, polished, haunted. He took the stand like a man walking barefoot across glass. No outbursts, no tears, just the kind of honesty that cuts because it doesn't need to shout. And then came the phone. A second phone discovered hidden in the lining of a bag. Encrypted. Secret. Containing conversations with someone codenamed KK. The room froze when it was mentioned. Because a hidden phone. That's not a slip. That's strategy. The prosecution presented it not as evidence of arrogance, but desperation. They laid out message logs, timestamps, contact patterns. And suddenly what had been whispers became echoes. Proof. Patterns. Cold trails made warm by the heat of scrutiny. Diddy's legal team scrambled. They objected to every sentence, every breath. But for the first time, even the judge grew tired of them. Mr. Agnafilo, he said, we've allowed you to dance around this long enough. A low gasp from the gallery. Diddy didn't react, but I saw his foot bounce beneath the table. A twitch, an impulse, a crack in the facade. And then I saw it again. That same defense attorney, that same note, slipped across the table. Quiet, quick, precise, just like the last one. Juror #10 noticed it too. He didn't say a word, but he shifted in his seat, and just enough to catch my attention. Our eyes met. There was no nod, no signal. But there was understanding. We weren't alone in this anymore. We were watching each other now, not for alliance, but for survival. And that terrified me most, because once the jury begins turning inward, trust is lost. And without trust, the system collapses. After the lunch recess, Judge Aaron called us back early. The defense had filed yet another motion this time, arguing that the atmosphere had become prejudicial and unstable. I almost laughed. They created the instability. They fed it. And now they were choking on the smoke. The judge denied the motion swiftly. Then he paused. There has been a second report, he said, voice level. Another juror has brought a concern to the court's attention. It will be handled outside your presence. Do not speculate. Do not discuss. But we already were. In glances, in body language, in silence. Someone had spoken again. Someone saw something again. And the jury box, the one place meant to be still, was turning on itself. After the session ended, we were escorted out as always. But that day, I walked slower, 'cause with every step I felt it. I wasn't walking out of a courtroom anymore. I was walking deeper into a war, and the battlefield was the truth. The next morning, Diddy smiled. That alone should have warned us something was coming. He entered the courtroom with the calm of a man who knew something the rest of us didn't like. He'd read ahead in the script and liked the ending. His posture was relaxed, his jaw unclenched, and for the first time in days, he made eye contact with us. Lingering. Too long. I froze when his gaze swept past me, not because of who he was, but because of what I saw. Not fear, not guilt. Control. Calculated, rehearsed, weaponized. The smile of a man who believed this courtroom was still his. But then Judge Aaron entered, and that smile faded. Let the record reflect, the judge began. We are now addressing the matter of the second juror. The courtroom held its breath. Not just us jurors, but everyone, the reporters in the back, the bailiffs at the walls, even the lawyers who usually scribbled endlessly now sat still. The judge didn't name names. He didn't have to. His tone said enough. This court was alerted by a juror of potential inappropriate communication within the courtroom. The juror involved did not wait to be asked. They came forward with full candor. Candor, that word again. It had become the heartbeat of this trial. He continued, the juror brought the concern directly to the court with no prompting and requested the court do what it saw fit. That he said pausing is the standard to which this panel must hold. I swallowed. That meant the second juror hadn't been caught. They had come forward, willingly. That was huge. Because when fear infects a jury, silence becomes survival. But not this time. This time, someone chose to break it. He didn't specify what was reported, just that it happened behind closed doors, out of view. But the undertone, the unspoken tension told us what it meant. Someone tried to send a message, and someone else refused to receive it. Diddy shifted again. He was no longer smiling, and neither was his defense team. The judge pressed forward. There's no place for subtle influence in this courtroom. Body language, eye contact, note passing. These things may seem harmless, but in aggregate, they corrode the integrity of this process. My pen stopped moving. Because for the first time, it felt like someone in power truly understood what was happening to us. It wasn't just the motions or the objections. It wasn't the camera flashes or the headlines. It was the quiet things, the things we couldn't prove, but couldn't ignore. A nod across a room, a look that lasted too long, a whisper that felt rehearsed. Diddy had been trying to communicate, and someone had finally said no. The judge leaned forward. The next alternate juror, should one be required, is also a black man, he said. That has been verified. And let me be clear, race will not be used as a shield or a sword in this courtroom. We will not reduce these proceedings to performance. I saw Agnefilo's jaw tighten again. They had spent the weekend arguing that removing juror #6 would damage the jury's diversity. Now, with another black juror ready to take the seat, that argument crumbled. So what now? What new excuse would they find? What new stage would they build? The courtroom resumed. Testimony continued. But my mind stayed in that quiet moment when a single juror stood up silently and protected the system from within. That kind of bravery doesn't come easy. Not when the man watching you has built a kingdom from intimidation. I never found out who that juror was, but that day they reminded me what we were supposed to be. 12 mirrors, 12 truths, 12 people who could not be bought, blinked at, or bent. Even if we were afraid, even if we knew we were being watched, we were still standing, for now. By the 7th day, the courtroom no longer felt like a courtroom. It felt like a stage, its curtains threadbare, its spotlight blinded. And we, the jury, had become both the audience and the act. Every breath we took, every turn of our heads, felt choreographed, watched, because it was. They were watching us now. Not just the media or the crowd in the back rows, not just Diddy's team. The prosecution had assigned court officers silent, sharp-eyed, whose only job was to watch Diddy watching us. It felt absurd, but it also felt necessary. That's what happens when truth becomes something you have to protect with people, not just procedure. Brendan Paul returned to the stand. Still calm, still steady. But this time, the questions cut deeper. And then came the exhibit that shattered the last bit of composure, a screenshot. A still frame, pulled from that hidden phone the one allegedly used to contact KK. In the image, a timestamp aligned with a day Bana had testified about. The message, "I'll handle it. Stay quiet." The courtroom erupted. The defense lunged into objections so fast it was almost comical. Hearsay, misinterpretation, context, privacy. They fought like men trying to stuff ash back into a burning house. But it was too late. The image had been seen. The silence afterward was heavier than any shouting, like something sacred had been broken open. Even Judge Aaron took a moment. Then he leaned forward and said the words that chilled me to the core. Truth can be buried in silence, or revealed in fragments. Let the record show this is a fragment. He allowed the message to stand. The defense rattled and desperate called for another motion to strike it from record. Again denied. And that's when I saw it. Diddy. Not the man on TV, not the polished defendant in a $1,000 suit, but the man behind it. His mask slipped not dramatically, not like in movies. Just a twitch, a clench of the jaw, a downward stare, and then fury. Controlled, contained, but unmistakable. This wasn't the face of a man confident in his innocence. This was the face of a man cornered. I couldn't look away, and he knew it. His eyes darted, searching the jury box. Not with warmth, not with persuasion, with calculation, as if deciding which one of us was the weak link, which one might bend, might break. But no one flinched. Not this time, because we had seen too much. The nods, the notes, the fear behind the silence. And now this, a digital scar. A line of text that betrayed more than just arrogance. It betrayed intent. Diddy leaned in to whisper to his lawyer, his mouth-tight hands clenched. The prosecution rested their case with no flourish, no drama. Just 3 final words, "We are done." It rang louder than a gavel. Afterward, as we were led back to the jury room, The hallway felt narrower. The air felt thicker. Someone ahead of me, Juror #9, I think, murmured under her breath. It's not just a trial anymore. And she was right. It wasn't. It was a reckoning. And I had no idea how many of us would make it through intact. We were 12 again. 12 names, 12 bodies, 12 shadows seated in a box that no longer felt like a box, but a crucible. Everything about that final day pressed in on us like gravity. The weight of truth, of silence, of unspoken questions we were no longer allowed to ask. Diddy's defense was about to begin, but something had changed. The prosecution had rested without desperation. That meant something. It meant they knew what we knew. That this wasn't about how long you spoke, but what you left behind when you did. They left behind scars. The encrypted phone, the FaceTime offer to settle, the lies tangled in dates and silence. And Diddy's gaze cutting across the room like a scalpel. Always watching, always adjusting. We felt it. I felt it. And then came the moment no one expected. The triangle broke. For days, a subtle formation had existed among 3 jurors, always arriving at the same time, always whispering low, always stealing glances toward the defense table during breaks. But now, one of them, a young man with nervous fingers, sat alone. Eyes rimmed in red, shoulders collapsed. The triangle was no more. Whatever bond had been there, it cracked under the pressure. And suddenly the room felt honest again. Diddy's lawyers did what they could. They attacked the phone. They questioned the timeline. They painted Bana as inconsistent, unstable, self-serving. But it didn't stick. Because you can only scream liar for so long before the echoes betray you. And then, quietly, methodically, they tried something else. They turned to us. Body language changed. They leaned toward the jury box when they spoke. They used names. Imagine if you were accused. Think about what you would do. It wasn't defense. It was seduction. But it was too late. We had already felt the burn of being manipulated. We had already watched one of our own get dismissed for inconsistencies. We had already seen someone brave enough to speak up, risking everything to keep this thing pure. That meant something. In the hallway during a break, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the glass door. I looked tired, older, but also steadier. I wasn't the same person who sat in this box on day 1. None of us were. We weren't 12 blank slates anymore. We were 12 people who had been inside the storm and hadn't closed our eyes. And that mattered. That had to matter. As closing arguments began, the defense's voice wavered more than once. They knew the room had turned. You can feel it when your words hit dead air. Then Judge Aaron instructed us, you must weigh the evidence. Not the noise, not the names, not the fear. And as we stood to leave, I looked back one last time. Diddy didn't move, didn't blink, just stared, hollow and still. I thought of all the eyes he'd met in that room, all the nods, all the smiles, all the performances. But the show was over now. And this time, the script wasn't his. We returned to the jury room, and the door closed behind us. It was just us now. 12 shadows. And one verdict.